The black car idled quietly at the base of my private driveway. I had just spent the last 14 hours in a pressurized cabin flying back from Tokyo, having successfully closed a grueling 9-figure commercial logistics merger that had taken 6 months of my life to orchestrate. My phone was dead. My inbox was overflowing with post-merger integration emails. All I wanted was the absolute impenetrable silence of my own home. I pressed the button on the visor to open the heavy wrought iron gates of the estate. The mechanical hum of the motors was the only sound in the humid afternoon air. The gates swung open, revealing the quarter-mile stretch of pristine, tree-lined driveway leading up to the main house. I bought this property 7 years ago. I didn't finance it. I didn't leverage it against my corporate holdings. I bought it in cash, transferring the funds directly from my personal accounts. It was my sanctuary, entirely isolated from the ruthless, high-stakes financial warfare of my daily life. It was the one asset in my portfolio that was completely, undeniably mine, free and clear of any bank, board, or lien, which is why the massive neon orange sign hammered violently into the perfectly manicured lawn near the front steps felt like a physical blow to the chest. I told the driver to stop. I stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching loudly under my shoes, and walked slowly toward the sign. What the bold black lettering was impossible to misinterpret. Notice of public auction, foreclosure sale, property subject to immediate bank seizure. Beneath the screaming headline was the logo of Vanguard National Bank, followed by a docket number, a local sheriff's contact line, and an auction date set for exactly 14 days from today. My pulse spiked, but I didn't panic. Panic is a useless, amateur emotion. I am a corporate strategist. When I see an anomaly, I don't scream, I audit. When I stood on the lawn for exactly 30 seconds, analyzing the variables, Vanguard National Bank, a foreclosure notice, a public auction. None of this was mathematically possible. You cannot foreclose on a property that has no debt. I walked into the house, completely ignoring my luggage sitting on the porch. I didn't even turn on the lights. I went straight to my home office, sat at my heavy oak desk, and booted up my encrypted workstation. I bypassed my standard personal accounts and logged directly into the county clerk's digital property records database. I pulled the master file for my parcel number. The screen populated with the historical data of the estate. Purchase date 7 years ago. Status paid in full. I scrolled down to the active liens section. That was where the financial anomaly was hiding, glaring at me in black and white text. 11 months ago, a massive deed of trust had been recorded against the property, or someone had taken out a $5 million mortgage against my home. I felt a cold, sharp knot form in my stomach. I clicked on the scanned PDF of the mortgage document. I scrolled rapidly past the standard banking boilerplate, straight to the signature page. There it was, my name, signed in blue ink. It was a spectacular forgery, catching the exact slant and pressure of my handwriting, but it was just a fraction too neat, a machine-perfect replication. Next to the forged signature was the notary stamp, legally validating the fraudulent document, and right below that, the mechanism of the theft was laid bare, executed via power of attorney. I stopped breathing for a fraction of a second. 9 years ago, before my company had truly exploded into a multi-million-dollar empire, I had undergone a severe, unexpected emergency surgery. While heavily medicated in the ICU, my legal counsel had drafted a temporary, highly specific power of attorney, where granting my parents, Arthur and Helen, the authority to handle my immediate medical billing and sign basic tax documents until I recovered. It was a document born out of vulnerability and trust, a document that I had formally revoked the moment I was discharged from the hospital. I opened a new tab and accessed Vanguard National Bank's automated mortgage servicing portal. I typed in the loan number listed on the foreclosure sign. I'm using my Social Security number to force the system to display the loan history. Origination date, 11 months ago. Principal amount $5 million. Current status 180 days. Past due, default. I clicked on the disbursement record to see where the $5 million had actually gone. The money hadn't been transferred into any of my known corporate or personal accounts to sit in escrow. The entire $5 million had been wired in a single lump sum directly into a joint checking account, and an account registered to Arthur and Helen, my parents. I sat in the dark office, the harsh blue light of the monitor illuminating the sheer, sociopathic magnitude of the betrayal. While I was overseas, working 100-hour weeks to expand my empire, my parents had dug up a 9-year-old legally dead power of attorney. They had found a corrupt or dangerously negligent notary. They had forged my signature on federal banking documents, leveraged the entire equity of my paid-off sanctuary, and pocketed $5 million in cash. Then they simply stopped paying the mortgage. They let the loan default. They sat back in silence, living off the stolen millions, fully aware that the bank was quietly moving to seize my home, evict me, and destroy my personal credit score forever. They thought they had committed the perfect, untraceable crime. They thought that because my name was on the fraudulent loan, and I would be legally forced to quietly pay off the $5 million debt just to save my own house from the auction block. They treated me like a disposable hostage ATM. I leaned back in my chair. The anger that washed over me wasn't hot or explosive. It was absolute zero. It was the kind of cold, calculated fury that liquidates companies and ruins lives. I picked up my cell phone. I didn't call the police. I didn't call my corporate lawyers. I dialed my mother's number. She answered on the second ring. The background noise sounded like a busy, expensive country club dining room. "Oh, darling," Helen's voice chirped through the speaker, dripping with a sickening, manufactured sweetness. "You're back from Tokyo. How was the flight? We missed you so much." "Helen," I said, my voice completely flat, completely devoid of any daughterly warmth. "I'm looking at a foreclosure sign on my front lawn. I'm looking at a $5 million wire transfer to your joint account." The background noise of the country club suddenly seemed very quiet. The line went dead silent for 3 agonizing seconds. "I need you and Arthur at the house," I stated, the command echoing in the silent office. "Right now." I didn't offer them a drink when they arrived. I didn't even meet them in the foyer. I remained seated behind my heavy oak desk in the home office, the printed to 50-page Vanguard National Bank mortgage dossier resting squarely in the center of the blotter. Through the large bay window, I watched them pull up the driveway. They weren't driving their usual sensible sedan. They pulled up in a brand-new, dealer-plated Bentley Continental GT, the dark sapphire paint gleaming in the late afternoon sun. Helen stepped out wearing a diamond tennis bracelet that caught the light with blinding intensity. Arthur adjusted the cuffs of a bespoke linen suit, and they didn't look like people who were terrified of being caught committing a federal crime. They looked like people who had just won the lottery. My lottery. They walked through the front door, their footsteps echoing down the hardwood hallway. They didn't knock when they reached my office. When they stepped inside, neither of them looked remotely ashamed. Arthur wore a relaxed, almost patronizing smirk. Helen immediately went to inspect a new abstract painting I had hung on the far wall, and completely ignoring the suffocating tension in the room. "You really need better lighting in here," Helen commented, tracing the edge of the frame with a perfectly manicured finger. "It's entirely too gloomy. You work too much. You're forgetting how to live." $5 million, I stated. My voice was completely flat, devoid of any fluctuation. I didn't raise it. I didn't need to. The sheer gravity of the number sucked the remaining air out of the room. Arthur sighed, a long, an exaggerated sound of parental exhaustion, as if he were dealing with a toddler throwing a tantrum over a broken toy. He walked over and sat down heavily in the leather guest chair opposite my desk, crossing his legs casually. "Now, let's not blow this out of proportion," Arthur began, his tone dripping with a practiced country club arrogance. "We had a severe temporary liquidity crisis. My commercial development project in Cabo San Lucas hit massive regulatory delays. We were over-leveraged on the bridge loans. We needed immediate cash to keep the contractors on site, and your capital was entirely tied up in that Tokyo acquisition. You were unreachable. So you decided to dig up a 9-year-old legally revoked medical power of attorney," I countered smoothly, picking up the forged signature page and sliding it across the desk toward him. "You found a negligent or highly compensated notary. You marched into Vanguard National Bank. I forged a $5 million mortgage against my primary residence and wired the cash to yourselves. And then, instead of paying the monthly premiums, you bought a Bentley and deliberately defaulted." Helen finally turned away from the painting. She crossed her arms, her diamond bracelet glinting in the dim light. She didn't look guilty. She looked profoundly annoyed that I was daring to question their financial authority. "You have more money than God," Helen snapped, dropping the sweet motherly facade entirely. "Your company clears tens of millions in profit every quarter. A $5 million loan is a rounding error to you. We raised you. We paid for your university. We gave you the foundation to build your little empire. Consider this an overdue dividend on our investment in you. Families help each other." I stared at her. The sheer, breathtaking entitlement was almost architectural in its scale. And they honestly believed that because I had built a fortune through years of relentless grinding, they possessed a divine, unassailable right to siphon it off whenever they pleased, regardless of the federal felonies required to do so. "You committed federal wire fraud and felony forgery," I stated, keeping my eyes locked on Arthur. "You leveraged a property you do not own to steal money from a federally insured bank." Arthur let out a short, barking laugh. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his face twisting into a smug, victorious sneer. "Let me explain the reality of the situation to you, since you clearly don't grasp the mechanics of banking," Arthur patronized, tapping his finger hard against the forged mortgage document on my desk. "The bank doesn't care about a 9-year-old power of attorney dispute. They don't care about your accusations of forgery. All they care about is the signature on this line, and the fact that the loan is 180 days past due." Arthur leaned back, completely satisfied with his own trap. "The foreclosure auction is in exactly 14 days, Arthur reminded me, his voice oozing with absolute tyrannical control. "If you try to tie this up in court by claiming fraud, it will take years. The bank will seize this estate, evict you, sell it at auction, and completely incinerate your immaculate personal credit score right before your company files its quarterly earnings report. Your board of directors will panic. Your stock price will tank." Helen stepped up behind Arthur's chair, placing a manicured hand on his shoulder, presenting a united predatory front. "You have exactly 2 weeks to write a check to Vanguard National Bank and pay off the $5 million, Helen said, smiling thinly. "You clear the debt, you save your precious house, and we all move on. You're a smart businesswoman. You know it's cheaper to just pay the bank than to let them destroy your life over a family misunderstanding. We'll even let you keep the Bentley if it makes you feel better." They thought they had checkmated me. They thought they had backed me into a financial corner where the only logical exit was to quietly absorb their $5 million theft to protect my own corporate assets. They were looking at me, waiting for the anger to break, waiting for the helpless resignation to set in. I didn't scream. I didn't threaten them with the police. I didn't tell them to get out of my house. I just looked down at the Vanguard National Bank foreclosure notice and then back up at my parents' arrogant, smiling faces. A slow, chilling realization began to wash over me. Not a realization of defeat, but a realization of the catastrophic, fatal error they had made in their greed. and they had pulled the deed to this house from the public county records they had access to 9 years ago, back when the power of attorney was active. They assumed the ownership structure had remained exactly the same. They assumed my name was still on the title. "You're right, Arthur," I said quietly, leaning back in my chair. "The bank only cares about the name on the deed." Arthur's smug smile widened into a full, victorious grin. He genuinely thought my quiet tone was the sound of surrender. He reached out, straightening his bespoke linen cuffs, preparing to dictate the terms of my capitulation. Helen let out a soft, theatrical sigh of relief, releasing her grip on her diamond tennis bracelet. They both settled into their chairs, ready to watch me open my encrypted banking app and quietly wire $5 million to Vanguard National Bank to cover up their felony. They were so blinded by their own greed, so accustomed to viewing me as their personal safety net, so that they completely failed to realize they were sitting in the blast radius of a corporate landmine. "What you fail to understand about high net worth asset management, Arthur," I began, my voice remaining perfectly level, "is that, as a corporate CEO, my primary operational directive is liability mitigation. When you build a multi-million-dollar empire, you become a target. Lawsuits, hostile acquisitions, market fluctuations. You never, ever leave your most valuable personal assets exposed to direct liability." Arthur's smile faltered, just a fraction of an inch. His eyes darted to the forged mortgage document on my desk, then back to me. He didn't understand where I was going with this, but the absolute lack of panic in my voice was finally starting to make him uncomfortable. 14 months ago, I continued, folding my hands methodically over the Vanguard foreclosure notice, during the preliminary risk assessment phase for the Tokyo Logistics merger, my corporate tax attorneys conducted a massive, sweeping restructure of my personal portfolio. They identified this estate as an exposed asset because it was held in my legal name. So we executed a quiet title transfer. The room went dead silent. The faint hum of the air conditioning suddenly sounded deafening. Helen stopped inspecting her nails. 12 months ago, I formally and legally transferred the complete ownership, title, and deed of this entire estate into a highly secure private liability corporation called Aegis Holdings, LLC, I stated, delivering the fatal mathematical error of their entire scheme. I am the sole executive shareholder of Aegis Holdings, but as a private citizen, I do not own this house. A corporation does. Arthur's face went completely slack. The color began to rapidly drain from his cheeks, leaving him looking pale and suddenly very old. He was a businessman, a sloppy one, but he knew enough about corporate law to realize that the ground beneath his feet had just vanished. "No," Arthur stammered, his voice suddenly losing all of its booming country club authority. "No, that's impossible. We pulled the county records. The title search clearly showed—" "You pulled the outdated county tax rolls," I corrected him, the clinical precision of my words cutting through his rising panic. "Where Aegis Holdings, LLC, operates under a multi-tiered privacy trust. The public-facing tax database takes up to 18 months to update corporate transfers. If you had hired a competent forensic title attorney instead of relying on a negligent strip mall notary, you would have known that." I picked up the forged mortgage contract and held it up in the dim light of the office. "Do you understand the federal mechanics of what you have done, Arthur?" I asked, dropping the document back onto the desk with a heavy, final thud. "You didn't forge my signature to mortgage my house. You forged the signature of a private citizen to mortgage a multi-million-dollar commercial asset owned by a corporate entity." "But the power of attorney," Helen interrupted, her voice shrill and trembling as the reality of the situation finally pierced her arrogance. She stepped forward, pointing a shaking, manicured finger at the paperwork. "We had your power of attorney, and it gave us the right to sign your name. That legally dead medical document from 9 years ago granted you temporary signing rights for me, the individual," I explained, watching the absolute terror wash over her face. It did not grant you executive board authority over Aegis Holdings, LLC. Therefore, the mortgage contract you signed with Vanguard National Bank is not just fraudulent. It is a legal impossibility. Arthur gripped the armrests of his leather chair. He was breathing heavily, and his eyes darting frantically around the room as if looking for a physical escape route from the financial slaughterhouse he had walked into. Vanguard won't care, Arthur lied, his voice cracking, desperately trying to reconstruct the leverage he had lost. The money was dispersed. The loan is on their books. They will still foreclose on this house. Vanguard cannot foreclose on a property that the borrower never legally owned, I corrected him, my voice dropping into a freezing, uncompromising register. When their legal department realizes that their title insurance company completely botched the ownership verification, this foreclosure will be instantly voided. Aegis Holdings, LLC, owes Vanguard Bank absolutely nothing. I leaned forward, closing the distance, letting the absolute zero temperature of my anger radiate across the oak desk. "You didn't steal from me," I whispered, the words hitting them like physical blows. "Until you stole $5 million of Federal Reserves from a highly aggressive, heavily insured national bank. You committed massive, undeniable mortgage fraud against a federally regulated institution, and you left a flawless paper trail leading directly to your joint checking account." Arthur tried to stand up, but his legs seemed to give out. He slumped back into the chair, his bespoke linen suit suddenly looking like a straitjacket. Helen let out a pathetic, whimpering gasp, burying her face in her hands. The Bentley in the driveway, the diamond bracelet, the country club dinners, it was all financed by a catastrophic federal crime that was about to detonate. "Claire, please," Arthur choked out, the arrogance entirely evaporated, replaced by the pathetic begging tone of a cornered animal. "We didn't know. We thought it was your house. If Vanguard finds out, they'll ruin us. They'll take our house. Wick, they'll take my retirement funds. They will take absolutely everything you own," I confirmed with cold, factual precision. "And then the bank's fraud division will hand this entire dossier over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation." "You have to pay it," Helen shrieked, dropping her hands from her face, her makeup beginning to smear with tears of genuine terror. "You have to pay the $5 million. You can afford it. If you just pay the loan, the bank will never look at the paperwork. You can't let your own parents go to federal prison." I didn't answer her. I didn't owe her an explanation, and I certainly didn't owe her $5 million. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out my heavy black metal private wealth management card. I picked up my cell phone, dialed the unlisted 24-hour direct concierge line for Vanguard National Bank's ultra-high net worth division, and pressed the speakerphone button. And I set the phone down directly on top of the forged mortgage document. The phone rang twice. "Vanguard Private Wealth, Executive Division. This is Mr. Sterling. How may I assist you this afternoon?" A crisp, professional voice echoed through the silent office. Arthur let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. He lunged across the desk, his hands desperately reaching for the phone to end the call, to stop the avalanche from falling. I didn't even flinch. I simply caught his wrist in mid-air, as my grip locking around his expensive watch with unyielding, paralyzing force. I stared directly into his terrified eyes as I spoke into the phone. "Mr. Sterling," I said calmly, maintaining my iron grip on my father's wrist, "I am calling to report a $5 million syndicated mortgage fraud executed against your institution. I need you to immediately connect me to the Senior Director of your Federal Fraud Investigations Unit. We have a catastrophic security breach to audit." Arthur stopped struggling. The sheer, terrifying weight of the vocabulary I was using, syndicated fraud, federal investigations, catastrophic breach, finally broke through his country club delusion. His arm went completely limp in my grasp. I released his wrist. He stumbled backward, collapsing into the leather guest chair, his chest heaving as he stared in absolute horror at the glowing speakerphone on my desk. Immediately, Ms. Harrington. "Please hold," Mr. Sterling replied, his professional customer service tone instantly dropping into urgent, clipped efficiency. The line clicked, replacing his voice with the sterile, automated hold music of Vanguard National Bank. Helen was hyperventilating. She grabbed the edge of my heavy oak desk to steady herself, the diamond tennis bracelet clinking violently against the wood. "Hang up," she pleaded, her voice a desperate, unrecognizable whisper. "Please, just hang up the phone. Well, we'll sell the Bentley. We'll liquidate the Cabo property. We will pay you back every single cent. Just don't let the bank audit the paperwork." "You can't liquidate the Cabo property, Helen," I replied, my voice devoid of any sympathy, analyzing their financial ruin with the detachment of a forensic accountant. "Arthur just admitted the bridge loans are over-leveraged. The property is underwater. The Bentley depreciated the second you drove it off the lot. How you don't have $5 million to repay the bank, and you certainly don't have it to repay me." The hold music abruptly stopped. A new voice came on the line, deep, authoritative, and entirely lacking in the deferential warmth usually reserved for high-net-worth clients. "This is Director Vance, Global Head of Fraud and Risk Management for Vanguard National. Mr. Sterling escalated this call as a Priority 1 emergency. Ms. Harrington, nor am I speaking with the primary account holder? You are speaking with the Chief Executive Officer and sole executive shareholder of Aegis Holdings, LLC," I stated clearly, establishing the legal boundary immediately. "Director Vance, I am looking at a notice of public auction for a property located at my primary residential address. The notice references a $5 million mortgage originating 11 months ago, currently in default, and I need you to pull that file right now." I could hear the rapid, aggressive clacking of a mechanical keyboard through the speakerphone. Director Vance was bypassing standard customer portals and digging straight into the bank's mainframe. "I have the file open, Ms. Harrington," Vance confirmed, his tone guarded. "The mortgage was executed under a power of attorney. The funds were disbursed to a joint account belonging to Arthur and Helen Harrington. The loan is 180 days delinquent. The foreclosure proceeds automatically under these conditions." "The foreclosure is proceeding illegally, Director Vance," I countered, delivering the corporate kill shot with absolute, unyielding precision. "I revoked that medical power of attorney 9 years ago. Furthermore, my parents did not leverage an asset they owned. 12 months ago, I transferred the complete title and deed of this estate into Aegis Holdings, LLC. You underwrote a $5 million residential loan on a commercial asset, utilizing a legally dead document, and your title insurance company completely failed to verify the ownership structure." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. It was the silence of a senior bank executive realizing his institution had just been spectacularly defrauded, and that the legal liability was massive. Arthur put his head between his knees, letting out a low, wretched moan. Helen was completely paralyzed, her eyes wide with terror, staring at the phone as if it were an active, explosive device. "Stand by," Director Vance ordered sharply. The keyboard clacking returned, faster and more frantic this time. He was pulling the county corporate registry. He was verifying the Aegis Holdings, LLC transfer. He was watching $5 million of the bank's secured leverage vanish into thin air. 30 seconds later, Vance returned. His voice was no longer guarded. It was laced with the cold institutional fury of a bank that had just been robbed. "Ms. Harrington, I am looking at the updated corporate title registry," Vance stated, his words falling like an anvil in the quiet office. "I can confirm that Aegis Holdings, LLC, is the sole legal owner of the property in question. I am immediately halting the foreclosure auction. A formal retraction will be issued to the county sheriff within the hour. Your estate is secure." Helen let out a ragged, pathetic gasp of relief. She actually thought, in her boundless arrogance, that halting the foreclosure meant the crisis was over. She thought they had gotten away with it. "However," Director Vance continued, his voice dropping into a freezing prosecutorial register, "this institution has just disbursed $5 million in uninsured capital based on severely fraudulent documentation. Because the asset cannot be seized, the liability transfers instantly and entirely to the signatories of the loan." Arthur snapped his head up, his face ashen. He knew exactly what was coming next. "I am initiating a code red hard freeze on the destination joint account, registered to Arthur and Helen Harrington, effective this exact second," Vance announced, executing the financial death sentence. "All funds, checking, savings, and attached credit lines are permanently locked. We are accelerating the loan, or demanding immediate repayment of the $5 million principal, plus all accrued interest and penalty fees." "You can't do that!" Arthur suddenly screamed, lunging toward the desk, his voice cracking with absolute panic. "Our entire operating capital for the Cabo project is in that account. You'll bankrupt my development firm. The contractors will walk." Director Vance didn't even pause. He didn't care about Arthur's contractors. He only cared about the bank's money. "Furthermore," Vance concluded, his voice echoing off the mahogany walls of my office, "because this incident involves forged documents, interstate wire transfers, and a federally insured institution, Vanguard National Bank is legally obligated to file an immediate suspicious activity report. Our internal legal team is compiling the dossier now. We are formally referring Arthur and Helen Harrington to the Federal Bureau of Investigation for criminal prosecution." The line went dead, and the click of the disconnected call resonated in the silence of the room. The trap had closed. There was no negotiation, no family discount, no sweeping it under the rug. In less than 5 minutes, I had entirely dismantled their lives using nothing but a cell phone and the airtight mechanics of corporate law. I looked across the desk at my parents. They were utterly, hopelessly ruined. The line went dead. The click of the disconnected call resonated in the heavy silence of the office. The trap had closed completely. There was no negotiation, no family discount, no sweeping it under the rug. In less than 5 minutes, I had entirely dismantled their lives using nothing but a cell phone and the airtight mechanics of corporate law. I looked across the oak desk at my parents. They were utterly, hopelessly ruined. "You didn't," Helen whispered, her voice hollow, completely devoid of the shrill entitlement she had walked in with. Then she stared at the speakerphone as if it were a venomous snake. "Claire, tell me you didn't just let them do that. Tell me you have a corporate override. You can fix this. We are your family." "You lost the right to use that word the second you forged my signature on federal banking documents," I replied, my voice as cold and unyielding as the marble floors of my lobby. "I didn't let the bank do anything, Helen. Vanguard's fraud division operates under strict federal compliance laws. Now, when a $5 million unsecured loss is triggered by a fraudulent deed of trust, they are legally mandated to lock the destination accounts and notify the authorities. You built the guillotine. I just refused to put my neck in it." Arthur was shaking. The man who had walked into my home reeking of country club arrogance and sporting a bespoke linen suit was now curled inward, his hands gripping his hair in absolute despair. The reality of a permanent, catastrophic account freeze was finally sinking in. "The contractors in Cabo," Arthur gasped, his breathing shallow and rapid. "The payroll for the development site. It was all tied to that joint account. By tomorrow morning, the checks will bounce. The unions will walk off the site. The bridge loan creditors will file for immediate liquidation. I'll be bankrupt before the weekend." "Yes," I agreed factually. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply delivered the audit of his life. And that is just the civil fallout, Arthur. By next week, Vanguard's legal department will file a massive civil suit to recover the $5 million. They will place emergency liens on your primary residence. They will seize your investment portfolios. They will repossess the Bentley sitting in my driveway. But none of that matters, because the civil suit is just a placeholder until the FBI Financial Crimes Unit knocks on your door. "Please," Arthur begged, tears finally spilling over his eyelids, completely shattering his patriarchal facade. He looked up at me, his face a mask of pure terror. "I'll sign over the Cabo property to your company. I'll give you equity in everything I own. Just call Director Vance back. Tell him it was a misunderstanding. Tell him you authorized the power of attorney retroactively. Tell him I'm paying it back. Please. You can't let me go to federal prison. I cannot retroactively authorize the leverage of a corporate asset owned by Aegis Holdings LLC without committing severe shareholder fraud myself," I stated, drawing the final unbreakable boundary. "I am not going to jeopardize my corporate licensing, my board seat, or my freedom to cover up your sociopathic greed. You made a $5 million gamble with my life, assuming I would be too weak to fight back. You lost." I stood up from my desk, and the movement was calm, deliberate, and entirely final. "Your accounts are frozen, your assets are about to be seized, and you are officially trespassing on property owned by Aegis Holdings, LLC, I announced, looking down at the two shattered people sitting in my office. "Leave your keys to the Bentley on my desk. It was purchased with stolen federal funds, which makes it evidence. Call a taxi and get out of my house." Helen let out a gut-wrenching sob, burying her face in Arthur's shoulder. So Arthur didn't argue. He didn't threaten me. He reached into his pocket with trembling hands, pulled out the heavy silver key fob for the Bentley Continental GT, and placed it gently on the edge of my desk. They stood up slowly, moving like they had aged 20 years in the span of 10 minutes. They didn't say goodbye. They didn't look back. They shuffled out of my office, their footsteps heavy and defeated against the hardwood floors, leaving nothing but the silence of my fully secured or completely unencumbered sanctuary. The fallout was a masterpiece of federal efficiency. Vanguard National Bank did not hesitate. Within 48 hours, the bank's asset recovery team seized Arthur and Helen's primary residence, drained their remaining retirement accounts, and auctioned off the Bentley to cover the massive penalties and interest accrued on the fraudulent loan. The Cabo San Lucas development project collapsed into immediate bankruptcy, now wiping out whatever imaginary leverage Arthur thought he had left. 3 weeks later, at 6 a.m, the Federal Bureau of Investigation executed a raid on my parents' temporary rental apartment. They were indicted on multiple counts of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and bank fraud. Because they had absolutely no money left to hire high-priced defense attorneys, they were forced to rely on overwhelmed public defenders. Facing 20 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary, Arthur and Helen took a brutal plea deal. They were sentenced to 8 years each in a federal correctional facility, completely and permanently erased from the high society world they had sacrificed their only daughter to stay in. As for me, Aegis Holdings LLC remains untouchable. The Tokyo Logistics merger finalized ahead of schedule, driving our quarterly profits to record-breaking highs. I still live in my quiet, heavily secured estate. The massive neon orange foreclosure sign was removed from my lawn the very next morning, leaving the grass perfectly pristine. When you build an empire, the greatest threats rarely come from your corporate rivals. They come from the people who think they are entitled to the keys. If you came home from an exhausting business trip to find your own parents had forged your signature, taken out a secret $5 million mortgage on your paid-off home, and bought a Bentley while letting your house go into foreclosure. What would you do? Would you quietly pay off the debt to save your family from prison? Or would you make that fatal phone call to the bank's fraud department and watch their entire lives burn to the ground? Let me know your strategy in the comments below. If you loved this story of cold, calculated corporate justice, drop a like, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video.